Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Welcome to part 3 of my ongoing beginning of the year series, where I'm rounding up everything for my tier 1. These are going to be albums that we use to set the standard for the rest of the year. All very exciting, a lot of really great music. This particular post kind of focuses in on more energetic alt rock in a very general sense, but even within that field, we have some variety here. Starting off with Turnstile's Never Enough. Now, if you want to talk about a field, let's think about it this way. Imagine, if you will, a three-dimensional field in which you have an x-axis that represents Jane's addiction. And then you have a y-axis that represents the police, and then you have a z-axis that represents the Flaming Lips. Most of what you hear on this Turnstile album can kind of be mapped moment by moment in this field. Now, and generally speaking, it will kind of stick kind of to the walls, right? There's not a whole bunch of space where they kind of dive into the middle of those three influences. But I think as you go through this album, listening to the way in which they play off of new wave and post-punk and psychedelia in sort of intermittent ways, really keeps this album very varied and interesting. And what's striking is how assured the album feels despite that breadth of influences. I mean, there's definitely some moments on here where it feels like, you know, Zenyatta Mandata will probably be calling Never Enough to ask for their songs back at a certain point. But Turnstile still tends to resist nostalgia for its own sake. And I think restraint plays a little bit of a role here as well. The band's joyful exuberance is often really tempered by control. And keeping this balance between the energy of post-hardcore and the clarity of new wave and the sort of the imaginative aspects of psychedelia is where Turnstile's ambition kind of pays off for this. It doesn't feel indulgent, but instead it's a band with high aspirations exuding a lot of confidence on an album that I think is very successful. The way that the songs segue from one to the other sort of indicates that this is an album that's meant to be listened to as a whole album, which is my favorite format as a person that's an album listener. And this is an album that showed up on a lot of last year's best of lists, is where I discovered it. And I think a lot of that's really super well deserved. This album really surprised me from the get-go and has paid off again and again as I've listened to it.
Let your guard down anywhere you go. In the right place, at the right time, it's still you sinking to the floor. It's never enough.
The next I got The White Stripes, their debut album. This album was released in 1999, and quite a while before, you know, Jack White became a household name and never will have to work again thanks to the ubiquitous nature of Seven Nation Army. But at this point in their career, this album was really only available to a very small area of the Detroit local music scene. It really only gained widespread recognition as the band became more visible. But what a really fantastic initial statement this is for the White Stripes. Again, the White Stripes is a band in my mind that really shouldn't work. How are you going to have a duo that's just a guitar player and a drummer really give you a sound that is so full and self-realized that you don't miss having a bass player, you don't miss having a keyboard player? And especially on this one, because it's very, very raw, it's very stripped down. Later on in their career, the White Stripes would have things that are a lot more studio enhanced, a lot more ornate, but here it's really just the two of them. And they get by on that by the way that Jack White really minds the essential idea of what the blues are. Now, Jack White here isn't really trying to innovate the blues and push it forward in the way like Stevie Ray Vaughan would have. Instead, he's really about preserving intent. Jack White aligns himself, I think, a lot more closely with guys more like Jimmy Page and Keith Richards than really heavy-duty players like Eric Clapton. But it wasn't his intention, though, to really find new areas for the blues to go into. He was more about showing people what was so important about it in the first place. And you can see this extremely clearly on their debut album, because the second track is a Robert Johnson cover for the Stop Breaking Down Blues. And Robert Johnson is sort of the key original figure for all those European rock guitar players that reinterpreted American blues, turned it into, you know, British pop and brought it back to us. That was a common touchstone were these original Robert Johnson recordings. And by covering that tune, I think he really aligns himself with the original intent of what rock music was in the 60s. But by no means is the White Stripes retro. In 1999, what they were doing was mixing the confrontational nature of garage rock and punk rock through the lens of the blues and writing really catchy alternative rock music. They really showed the blues' continued relevance to American culture.
I can't walk the streets now to calm and lay my mind. I said, pretty mama, she starts breaking down, stop breaking down. Stop breaking down.
The next up I got Silverchair, Young Modern. Silverchair got their start in the mid-90s, kind of on the tail end of grunge, when grunge was coming out. And in some ways, you could almost say that they were the post-grunge Hanson, because as a young group of guys, a trio of guys from Australia, 14-year-old guys cranked out their debut album in 8 days. And had some notoriety in the US, but really became almost iconic in their home country of Australia. So in the US, they were a band that probably people were somewhat familiar with through that debut album, but they continued to make albums and progress artistically by leaps and bounds in the years to follow, especially as they were finishing up with high school and maturing as people and musicians together. So this Young Modern album was released after about a 4 or 5 year hiatus. It was the last album that they released as Silverchair. And what you see on this album, I think, is them really looking at combining the florid nature of the Beatles' music with their already established alternative rock style. And although the end result is kind of like a complex version of glam rock, along the lines of what David Bowie was probably doing in some of his more adventurous pop work, it really shows Silverchair's ambition as artists above just being like a rock band, and also sees them maturing to the point where they can realize that ambition on this album. But in the process of this maturation and sort of folding these influences into their music, they never really lose the core of what they are. They still sound like Silverchair. It's not like they had this big revolutionary moment where they're all of a sudden making, a Sgt. Pepper's cover band. That's not the case. Instead, they're really looking at ways to broaden the scope of their music without losing essentially what they are as a band. And I think it'd be remiss if I didn't point out this great cover art for this album, the way that they're sort of weaving in a tribute to Mondrian along with, the name of the album and their own sort of increased interest in the artistic nature of their own work. I think it all fits together in a way that really makes this whole album pretty commanding as a whole package, both musically and visually. And finally, I got Volbeat's Servant of the Mind. As a person who was raised as a Rush listener, part of my listening branched off and listened to progressive rock, but Rush also had one foot pretty clearly in the hard rock realm. And there's an aspect to my listening maybe I didn't chase down as hard as other things, but I'm a fan of a lot of hard rock music. And Volbeat really, as a person who listens to that sort of stuff, has been sort of waving at me in my peripheral vision for quite a long time. And one of my subscribers put this on as their suggestion for this year, gave me the excuse to finally take the dive and figure out what Volbeat was all about. And bottom line, it's a fantastic hard rock album. I mean, I could easily imagine Sammy Hagar singing some of these songs. Now, I don't think that the lead singer sounds like Sammy Hagar by any stretch of the imagination, but that kind of energy and melodicism, I think, that epitomizes Sammy Hagar's work can be found here. And also the kind of unevenness in some ways, because Sammy Hagar and his work was always either really good at having a very deep message with his music or kind of like superficial tail-chasing, messages and lyrics in his music. Volbeat kind of does that a little bit here too, where they have some songs in here that are really great and thought-provoking, and then they have some where they kind of fall into stereotypical hard rock tropes, D&D and mythological stuff. It really fits their style very well, but also some of it fits very well in already super well-established hard rock archetypes, where it feels like they're sort of coasting along on the genre shorthand. But man, when they get it right, and especially when they lean into the more tuneful, melodic side, their songs are electrifying and very, very exciting. I'm especially fond of the songs where there are these big soaring melodies over the top, and they kind of do this almost Pachelbel-esque harmonic sequences underneath them, moving by fourths or fifths. For me, that's very harmonically satisfying. Even though it's kind of predictable, that's part of why it's satisfying. But easily, time after time, those are the songs that are my favorite ones on the album and the ones that I find myself singing most often. And a very interesting perspective on this one that I recently was reading about that I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around. Many people also cite Volbeat as sort of a psychobilly band, and that the lead singer has a connection with Elvis's voice, Elvis's persona, which is an interesting facet of their listening that I'm just now kind of trying to open up, but it's changing the way that I'm viewing them. The idea of like Elvis fronting a heavy metal band, I think, is really compelling, and Volbeat lets me kind of explore that possibility in a really, engaging way. And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it out with your friends. Also follow me over on Spotify. I've got the 2026 Dr. Spin Radio already started up, so there's going to be tracks showing up. It's going to continue to grow throughout the year. Go check that out. And if you want to be involved in this year's 2026 Album of the Year competition spin-off series, please sign up for my Patreon below. And until you see you next time, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.